Yes, yes, everybody. A hearty good evening to one and all. It's so very good to be live streaming to you almost on time on a Sunday evening. Welcome to StoryTime. This is a fascinating, let's just say, episode 25. And all in all, we're going to be having a good time talking about very strange and mystical, arcane, esoteric, and very occult things. So, first and foremost, I am Friendly Euphoria from the southern tip of Africa, streaming to you with a little bit of electricity and technology, hoping to bring you little grains of wisdom in this podcast we call StoryTime. Now, what we do here is basically try and focus on the strange gaps in our understanding when it comes to where we are currently in history and where we've come from. In a certain sense, when you start to put everything under the lens, all kinds of weird and wonderful things begin to pop out. And that's what we're going to look at this evening. And to really kick us off, what I would like to do is begin with a quote. And the full quote is actually a bit longer, but the shorter version of it, I think, does the trick. Now, this evening's topic is all about wisdom, because literally, if you had to look at some of the problems facing the world today, it seems that we have a lot of information, but we have very little wisdom. There's not much that can be done with even the purest truth if you do not know how to order and understand the information in its context and all those good things. So when it comes to one of the great quotes in history, I'd like to bring your attention to good old Socrates. Here he is. And he says to us, the beginning of wisdom is knowing thyself. And that can be abbreviated much more shortly as just know thyself. I'd like you to just ponder on this just for a second. And as I change my mic back to its normal settings. Know thyself is an incredibly powerful cone of sorts. A cone, if you don't know, is paradoxical Buddhist thoughts that you contemplate for higher levels of understanding. But in this case here, the concept of know thyself is incredibly important. If you look at the kind of education we have today, we can build rockets, but we still have the most unhappy people in the world. The rates of children needing medication just to have a normal balance in their lives and their emotional constitution and all these kinds of things, it's not a winning battle as far as you look at the statistics extrapolated. In other words, we're living longer and having great advancements in medicine and technology and things like that, but we have children that can't remember numbers, cell phone numbers. I can remember landlines from houses that I don't live in anymore, to go show a little bit of my age. But it seems that kids these days understand information differently, and the internet keeping the information has changed the way memory works and just how we basically understand our environment. Everything's just a quick Google away or a quick Wikipedia away, and so knowledge is fed to us. It is not experienced as it once had to be. I mean, obviously it's still experienced, there's no doubt about that, but in a deeper sense, wisdom comes from really taking that knowledge a step further and integrating it into your being and how that being that is you relates to the world around you, the people around you, the nature around you. Therein lies true wisdom, the natural order of things. And this is the giant lighthouse in the distance, the compass that guides our very feeble attempts to understand the universe. As humans, Sometimes we think we're big shots and we understand everything. Well, the truth of the matter is, the universe is still pulling a few moves on us. It is not as easy to know the true nature of reality without opening yourself up to many, many understandings. So just science is not going to solve the problem. And just social activity is not also going to solve the problem. Just religion is not going to solve the problem. And I'm not saying you need all of these things all at once, but you need to have the wisdom to know that you don't know, and want to know, and seek. That is the whole point of true philosophy, not this new age mumbo jumbo that we sometimes find spewed across the internet. And, starting off with this concept of know thyself, I think is really good because it ties in also with another really important quote that for me ties also very closely to that, and that is from the character Polonius from William Shakespeare's Hamlet, and he's busy having a monologue and telling his son about the dangers of going to university, and he says to his son, "To thy own self be true." And these two things, know thyself and to thine own self be true, although they might be separated by a few hundreds of years, these deep truisms will form the foundation of StoryTime 25. Because in this episode of StoryTime, we're going to be diving very deep into Esoterica. Now, the reason for this is, as I said, the whole point of Esoterica is really to find within yourself and from the nature around you truth. Whatever that truth is, there's the belief that there is a natural order. And so discovering the natural order of things lets you discover what creation itself is, what the creator or creators, there's different religious configurations of how you can see the nature of creation having a relationship with, the creator and creation itself. So there's different avenues that one can follow here. But essentially, we're going to focus on when we say Esoterica, we're going to be talking about basically the mystery schools. Now, loosely defined, we're going to first dip our toe in and then just throw ourselves straight forward. And before I start, let me also just preface this as an introductory episode to the whole concept of deep knowledge and deep wisdom, and this knowledge and wisdom being carefully curated and delivered through time, through very select channels. Now, we're going to discover why that is as well. Why have secret information that you're going to hide from the rest of humanity and have your little secret societies and things like that? What is the use of that? We're going to try and get into the mind of why mystery schools. But loosely speaking, I just also want to say that I am no expert in any of this. These are things that I've come across through my years and interests that I've taken and conversations that I've had with people. And, you'll see if you follow any of the episodes of Storytime, we jump around. We go straight from ancient mysteries. Last episode, we were talking about Atlantis. That was a setup to this episode. But we've also spoken about UAPs. We've also spoken about geopolitics. We've also spoken about laser weaponry, directed energy weaponry. And we jump around all the time. All of this stuff is related because all of it is information, and framed in its correct way creates wisdom. Now, again, I'm not the purveyor of truth or wisdom. I'm just some random dude on the internet. Euphoria. Pleasure to meet you. But my point is that many sources of information, especially in mainstream media, are not going to point these things out to you. And then sometimes if you go into the social media and you seek out, these groups or this information on the internet, it's sometimes difficult to put it all together if you don't have someone sometimes to just, nudge you a little bit forward and back so you're not going around in circles or backtracking unnecessarily. It's always good to have a little bit of guidance. I've had that in my lifetime. Very fortunately, it's made a part of who I am and my history. I'm very fortunate to have these tools at my disposal. And again, I'm not trying to tell you how to live your life, but the whole point of Esoterica is that the journey is yours. But arming yourself with information is really the way to find the deeper layers of reality. So that's more or less the point I want to make, and the reason that we're plunging into Esoterica and saying that it's connected to all these things, from UAP phenomena to geopolitics to technology, whatever you want to call it, even metaphysics at its most philosophical core. And I said that this was going to be a bit of an introductory course because we're going to blast through some of these big concepts and some of the schools and try and get a grip to all of this. As I said, you can spend your entire lifetime on just one of these topics. I mean, if you just say Aleister Crowley, good luck, there you go. There's thousands of books, there's millions of people involved and interested and talking and still, writing about this one person. So you can literally go down that rabbit hole for one lifetime. We're going to try and give you an aerial view, a top-down 3,000-foot view from above. Because if anyone is new to this information, they might have bumped into, the ancient Egyptians, and the Ankh is a symbol, and, going across the sea, we might see that Sanskrit has these fantastic origins in its proto-European language tree, and it might just sound like random things that are completely unrelated when you put it that way. But when you give it the right framing, you're like, we're talking about an antediluvian race that existed before, had high technology, spread the knowledge of astronomy, science, agriculture, language, geometry. These things were, maths and geometry were separate back in those days, but we evolved from all our cultures, say, some great beings that imparted these great wisdoms to us. Now, let's jump straight in. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to StoryTime 25. This evening we're going to be looking at Esoterica, the occult secrets of mankind. And as I mentioned in the beginning, it's all about knowledge. It's all about wisdom. It's all about, I'm going to use air quotes here for those who can't see it, but truth. Now, whose truth? We're going to discover. But one important starting point I just want to make is that while some of this might seem very messy, that is, the different mystery schools and who wrote what and the different belief systems. Some people, like, look at Helena Blavatsky. She's a Russian woman with, from the Siberian tundra, basically, who ended up in America smoking cigars on trains with men in the 1900s when that was, usually verboten, a woman of her time, as it were, and writing about ancient Eastern traditions of things like reincarnation. And so, you really pulled across the world there. And what I'm going to try and do here is try and give you a better understanding without going too deep into all of it. Because again, as I was saying, if you sometimes jump on the internet and look for this information, it's sometimes presented to you in a very culty fashion, or in a very pseudoscience fashion, or in a very conspiracy theory kind of fashion. And that's fine. I mean, everyone to each their own. There's a grain of truth in all of this. But in story time, I try my best not to be too determined on the points, and just bring you fascinating and interesting, kind of like nodes that link and form a very interesting picture. And so that's what we're going to do with the Esoterica tonight. We're going to just brush across these interesting points and try to give you a great outline. As best as I can, as I said, it's a very large subject, so we're going to try to break it down in its different sectors, if I could put it that way. Systematic, if we can do so. Now, first and foremost, whilst we're on the topic of know thyself and to thy own self be true, I'd like to use that as the beginning point for all of these different people and groups that claim to have special information, special understanding about the nature of things. Now, some people will abuse the belief systems that others have, and you know, there are many cults and strange. I want to use the word religion, but it's very loosely defined in this particular sentence. But there are many strange groups of religions and cults and whatever that are sometimes completely fabricated. If you look, for example, and no offense to anyone who follows Scientology, but literally that is a religion that has many. I don't even know if you can sort of grant it the term of religion when it's actually a trademark. That's why it was banned in Russia. But the point is simply, this was made by a person who was famous for having links to sci-fi story and inventing great narrative and having bets with people that they could convince anyone of nearly anything and create their own religious order with some grains of truth. And now also they had links to intelligence services and were very well read, and so that means they had knowledge of perhaps some of these occult histories. And so you smush that all together, and then people can easily be bamboozled. My aim here is not to bamboozle anyone like Scientology does in some ways, but, and again, not to just pick on Scientology. I'm sure there's many other snake oil type establishments that will make many claims. But the whole point of Esoterica is that the journey is personal, and usually it is very interpersonal in the sense that you have a master and a student, and the transmission of information is very direct. The reason we said at the beginning, like, why would you have this secret information? I mean, what is the point? Why not just make it all open, make it all public knowledge? Well, there's a few reasons, and we'll look at them a little bit deeper, but basically it's these things. Number one, information is power. If you know the origins of mankind and what lies beneath the left paw of the Sphinx in the, chamber of knowledge, and I don't know, whatever, if you understand how the ancients were able to calculate precession when we were completely, at the time, apparently primitive, how did the Dogon know about binary stars that we only saw with telescopes much later in history? How did we have this explosion of mathematics and language and all these fascinating modifications to mankind? How did that all come about? All the cultures, ancient cultures, will tell you that information was seeded. We sort of looked at this in the last StoryTime, number 24. We looked at it sort of as the most easily recorded one. We called it the Neolithic explosion of cultural revolution or whatever. So in the Neolithic times, suddenly we had language and rock paintings and tools, and we were building things, very advanced things. Now, if knowledge is power, let's say, for example, you understand how they built the pyramids, huge structures, megaton blocks, high precision, astronomical and geological alignments. That shows a high degree of ability. So the information will obviously be, not obviously, but you know that humans will want to try and hide that. We've spoken about how militaries will always try and weaponize information and keep their ace of spades always hidden. Their ability is always obscured to the enemy so that they have that strategic advantage. Knowledge is power. So that's how the military sees it. But when you look at the high priests and kings and queens and sort of religious or political orders that existed in the past, they are usually the ones that kept high knowledge, because along with this usually came the ability to predict seasons, make various compounds, understand the deeper knowledge of biology, and all various things. Knowledge was power to the rich and the ones who actually ran the show. They often ran the show because they knew things that others didn't. So knowledge is power is one thing. But a lot of these mystery schools also tell us, and one of the reasons that we prefaced this episode with talks of Lemuria and Atlantis in the previous StoryTime 24, is because we see there that Lemuria and Atlantis went to war. They destroyed each other. Or at least that's what the myth says. And so we can see that sometimes technology can be very powerful, but if you're not spiritually, or let's say psycho-spiritually grounded, something like a hammer that can build a house, I've said this before, can easily turn into a weapon and destroy people instead of building great things. So it's not the fault of the technology, it's the fault of who operates the technology. And that's the other thing. Some will say that the mystery schools have kept certain lines of information secret because humanity's still not evolved enough to treat it with respect. And when we come to the esoteric side, they say, if you don't know what you're doing, how do you know you're not communicating with something that wants nefarious objectives, either against you or humanity as a whole? The jinn or the demons or whatever the case is. If you don't know what you're doing, who knows what you open yourself up to? So, same kind of way when we explore. We plan, we prepare, and hopefully we have guidance and a group of people to travel with. The same kind of thing applies here, spiritually speaking. Now, the one thing I just want to clarify before we dive straight in as well is that I'm not talking about religions here. Okay. We may mention religions, Islam, Christianity, Judaism, whatever. Or there are many, many religions in the world. But all of them do have their own mystical traditions. That's what I want to say. So I'm not specifically talking about religion, although those religions might be mentioned. So keep that in mind. And the other thing I want to just say is that although we said earlier there's different configurations, for example, monotheism, which is one divine creator God, or for example, Judaism isn't monotheistic. Many people think that is, but it's actually henotheistic. In other words, there are many gods, but they pick one. So Yahweh is the God that traditionally was picked, is my understanding, or how it was explained to me. And you can hear that in the Bible verse, "Thou shalt have no other gods but me." So there are other gods, but I'm the cool one. I'm the one that has your interests. And then obviously there's polytheism, as we said, monotheism, polytheism, henotheism. There's different kinds of configurations. The Buddhists have a very, very, I think it's called Panenhenic. If I'm not, I think I might have that wrong. But Panenhenic, as I said, is one of these different configurations of how humanity, over thousands of years, has tried to think about what the creation force is configured like. Is it a one versus many, or many versus one, or one in the many, or just is there prime unity, or is there a plurality in the unity, parts of the whole. These were metaphysical concepts that the Greeks went nuts with for thousands of years. It's great. If ever, I highly recommend people like Parmenides and Anaximenes as well. They have fantastically interesting foundational cosmogonies that explain the nature of reality, which still hold up today. It's fascinating. So, as I said, we're not talking about religion so much, or it's how they're configured. Is one God better than many gods, better than one God of many, whatever the case is. Not disputing that. Instead, Esoterica looks at your personal journey to that understanding of what God is. Different schools have different interpretations, but they all tell you that that journey is yours and personal. And so, why this has also sometimes been suppressed, and why I often bring it up, or why it sometimes comes up in conspiratorial forums, is because with a deep belief comes a way that you align yourself. If you have a very deep respect for nature, you're going to not as easily eat animals and cut down trees. You're going to, in fact, do quite the opposite. So, how you understand your fundamental nature and religion, in a sense, as it were pertaining to your relationship with creation, there is a very powerful mechanism there. And many have tried to exploit it. If you can exploit people with a belief system, you can make them do very incredibly powerful things. And so it's important to ask yourself this question sometimes. Who owns you? Who's trying to make you understand something or do something? And to remind yourself that that journey is your own. You may choose to, but it should never be forced. It should be something that, out of logic and wisdom, you come to the decision to follow. And that's how you a little bit better discern from those that wish to partake their knowledge and truth with you without trying to bamboozle you, in a sense, versus those that are trying to basically make a quick buck and control you in some way. It's very difficult to know the difference between the two. So you have to go forward carefully. And this is another reason that we have these mystery schools that kind of keep to themselves and teach the information straight from one level to another. You know, in other words, from master to initiate, and so on and so forth. Now, it gets interesting here. Let's jump in. Basically, Arcana goes back as far as you want. Whether you're looking at, proper ancient history, for example, the antediluvian history of what some called Lemuria and Atlantis and all these good things here. Whether you believe in that or not, or that we were talking about the Cyrillian hypothesis, given that the Earth has been around for millions of years, it's very possible that there's been other civilizations that have come and gone, and we'd never detect them. Millions of years will, recycle the Earth in a way that it's almost very difficult to detect if there was anything else asking these big questions before us. But in that openness to that question of what are the origins of the mystery schools, as I said, you can go back as far as you'd like. For some, it begins with the Greeks. They had or began using the word mysticism, which I think it was called mystakos. I hope I pronounced that correctly, but it meaning, I don't have an exact meaning. It's been described to me in different ways, but it's basically a way to induce or induct someone into knowledge, like how to familiarize yourself. It's kind of like a gnosis, they call it, a knowing from one's self experience. And although, you know, it goes like from there to different branches like Neoplatonism and Pythagoreanism and all these other kinds of mystic schools that existed. This is often the theme you get for with whatever age you go to. There's always a group that form and begin asking deep questions about the nature of humanity. So as I said, whether you go back from the antediluvian times to the Greco-Roman times or Egyptians or the mystery schools that we have nowadays that are a little bit more familiar to us, say the Theosophy Society or the Thelema Society or things like that. These are a little bit more known to us because it's kind of in modern times. But the whole concept goes back very, very far. And what I want to mention is that in every part of the world, there are mystery schools. And all of them have this common theme. They want to know the deep knowledge of creation and the relationship of the being to that creation. It is a journey of discovery, of knowingness. And so you've got, like, for example, your Eastern philosophies, Sufism, Taoism, Buddhism, Hinduism. I mean, there's tons of them. And then, of course, you've got lots that come from the Western traditions or the Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and such. And so, as I said, across the world, there are in each region a group of mystery schools. And then within each of those mystery schools, you've got these sub-branches. So it's a very rich environment of information. And it's often tied to religion because the religious orders, the churches, the temples are the ones that kept a lot of this information. They had the clout, let's say. Not only were they central points of cultural and societal functioning, but, you know, there was taxes and things like that that made them, and obviously religious beliefs that made them top of the pyramid, so to speak. And so they had, like a government does, great ability to protect essential information and the order in itself. Now, whether we're talking about mysticism or the occult, or we're talking about the arcane, the differences are very subtle, but it's kind of like the same, it's pretty much the same stuff. Occult basically just means the belief in something bigger. It's sometimes referred to as something hidden because that bigger means a level above the ordinary. And so it's not obvious to us what the information is. And so occult basically just means, in a certain sense, a level beyond the ordinary. So it's the next level up. And I just also want to mention that these belief systems are part of religions. So if you're a very religious person, and we're talking about different religions and demons and things, and you feel very uncomfortable, fine, no problem. But just remember that these are embedded in almost every religion of the world. Not almost, they pretty much are. These concepts of either oneness or of good and evil or of a journey to an enlightened state. I mean, name me one religion that doesn't have these kinds of concepts. But these concepts come before religion does. They were studied. They were part of the highest held knowledge that the Sumerians, for example, encoded in their stone tablets. And that's why we see that these themes and these gods that they talk about kind of span across different religions and regions. I'll give you an example. When, let's bring up, for example, the Epic of Gilgamesh. All right, so the Epic of Gilgamesh is a clay tablet that was discovered in Mesopotamia, which is basically modern day, is the modern day East, Oriental East, which is a very bad term that they that they attach to this. But basically, we in modern terms, I suppose, would call it the cradle of humanity in the so it's basically where the Euphrates and the Tigris River meet. This area was once called Mesopotamia, and it's known as the what is it? I'm going to find the exact. It's got a special word relating to it being a cradle of great knowledge, because language and farming and astronomy and all kinds of things spontaneously come from this. In fact, we spoke about Göbekli Tepe and some of the other archaeological dig sites being some of the oldest and showing a type of humanity that we didn't think possible at the time. Very organized, very religious, coming from great distances, building things with astronomical understanding. We thought we were a lot more primitive 12,500 years ago. And the interesting with Göbekli Tepe is that they pretty much believe that it was covered. They basically built it, used it a bit, and then decided to preserve it by just filling it up. And who knows if, again, they had knowledge of these cosmic cycles that we spoke about in the last story time. So, not to get too far off the beaten topic, so to speak, we're going to look at the Epic of Gilgamesh. I'm bringing it up on screen here. As I mentioned, it's a Sumerian tablet. It's basically a poem, and it was a tale. It's an epic, right? So it's got quite a long tale of this person called Gilgamesh and his great journeys. Basically, it's kind of the Iliad in that sense. So it's a series of poems. That's the way it's set up. And I believe it was written in Akkadian. Now, you can see the tablet here on the right-hand side, and this specific tablet that you see here in Wikipedia, you can see the cuneiform. It's absolutely beautiful. This talks about the Great Deluge, okay? In the Epic of Gilgamesh, there is a tale where, in keeping it short, there is communicated to humanity that there will be a great flood, and in the great flood, the seeds must be preserved of living things. So you'll notice that this sounds very similar like Noah's Ark. And this is the point I'm trying to make here, is that you'll see that the knowledge, which is in this case preserved as history, gets taken across as religion many years later, and it's almost identical. It's basically the story of Noah. And instead of taking animals 2 by 2, in the Sumerian, well, firstly, they didn't have an ark. They had something that could go beneath the waves as well. So it was a closed thing. And they didn't take animals. They took seeds, which we would imagine were either literal seeds or maybe DNA for the case of the animals. So this is the thing, is the ancient knowledge has come through sometimes as history or religion or whatever the case is, but it's all has common origins, and they're all pointing back to the antediluvians, the wise men that came and endowed us with knowledge and accelerated humanity forward. So it is absolutely fascinating as not only a story, because there's obviously more to it than just the Great Flood, but you can see how these Akkadians back then had a knowledge of the cosmos and floods and stuff that were then, taken across to others. And again, it was kept in the great temples by the great leaders. Not something that you would easily just give to anyone and everyone, because again, some of this information could have information was power. If you were the king and you knew when the seasons came and went, and when eclipses happened and deluges came and went, you had the history of your people. You were, in some sense, kind of protected. And so again, whether it's a true history or just a poem, we see it in every culture of the world. Now, as I said, moving away from religion, the occult takes from these religions many times the grains of truth, and then they add their own sort of spin on it. So whether you're looking at Hermetic philosophy or the fourth way, we'll touch on these in future. Basically, what Esoterica looks at is universal laws. Whether you're, again, taking cultures from Easter Islands, Hawaii, Australia, New Zealand, Siberia, Asia, Africa, North and South, the whole world basically has deep believers of universal laws. It may not be obvious, but maybe if we go through them, you'll see that many religions talk of the same or similar principles, but perhaps in different ways. Now, some of these come from, some say, the Hermetic philosophies or the Egyptian philosophies, or the or even further back, the Mesopotamian cultures had great mystery schools as well. But to simplify it, basically they come across these divine laws. As I say, they're trying to understand the universe, so the principles must be applicable to all. And this is where sometimes the New Age stuff kind of comes in. So I'm going to keep it very basic. If I could keep it more in its principle, then you'll see that you don't need that New Age stuff with it. If you want it, that's fine. But there's generally like 12 of these concepts. So the number one is the law of oneness. All is one. What they basically mean by this is everything is creation from creation. Whatever you are or I am, we all came from the same mechanism of reality. Whether matter and energy seem different things is just a matter of optics, because actually they come from the same source mechanism. So there is a kind of oneness. We are all part of and are the same whole structure, this whole same thing. They then follow up with this and say that there is also the law of movement or vibration or frequency. Basically, only God is the only thing that remains not stationary, but as God is all movement, there is no place that the creation, there is no configuration of the creation that it hasn't yet made. And so from its aspect, everything is already past, present, and future perfectly stationary. But for us experiencing the creation, there is always movement. To make this a little bit of a simpler idea, if you think of a computer screen and you see a dot moving across the screen is not moving. The dot is not moving. It's just pixels that turn on and off and give you the illusion of movement. And so that is a good kind of concept, that nothing, everything is in vibration, everything is in movement, everything has a frequency, nothing stands still. The only thing that is stationary is the creation itself, because it is all of creation. And so any movement relative to the creation is not really, it's the illusion of movement, but it's just that little pixel going across the screen. The the X and Y coordinates do not change, but the pixel moves or seems to move relative to our points of view. And this applies to the law of the third one, correspondence. And that just basically means that there is a direct relationship between that let's call it essence of creation and that which experiences it. And so in other words, us that are learning and the creative universe itself, there is correspondence between it. It's not just a one-way street. There seems to be a cycle. In other words, if there was no consciousness, there would be nothing observing the universe. And if nothing is observed, it's in a quantum fuzzy state. It's neither, until you measure a thing, quantum physics says it's just a probability wave. So it kind of seems that the universe needs consciousness in order to create physical things in a certain sense. I know that's a bit of a leap, but it's just that relationship that really is important. And now, if you have that relationship, they have these laws, which sometimes people call the law of attraction, but I like to call the law of manifestation, meaning that as a part of reality, with the endowment of this relationship between creation and created, because there is this relationship, you can affect reality, you can manifest. Some say the law of attraction and go into the secret business, but that's not my style. To me, it's the law of manifestation. It's saying that there is, because we are part of the universe, and there is a relationship that we are allowed to have with the universe in terms of understanding and affecting it. That is the law of manifestation. We can create within our experience in a relationship with the universe. And this is the law of inspired action. That's the next one. And this is actually a concept by a guy called Kumar, if I remember correctly. He says that inspired action is the gentle nudge you give the universe. In other words, I've mentioned this before as a concept. It's kind of like the universe is a book, the creation is a book, and we are the pen. So if we didn't have the book, we would have nothing to write on. Existence wouldn't be there for anything to be recorded. So it's kind of like God is the canvas upon which we show the splendidness of creation upon. And in that sense, that inspiration to show the glory of creation is an important drive. It's what keeps us away from nihilism and keeps us wanting to move forward in the expansion of our being. And so further forward, this leads to a few other things. Transmutation of energy through cause and effect. So I put these two things together, but if everything is the same stuff and it's just, the pixels are seemingly dancing across the screen, we must know that this is just energy changing its form. And directly from that, you get principle 7, the cause and effect. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. This is a spiritual understanding long before Einstein or Newton. And this is to say simply that when we affect the universe, when we exchange energy with the universe, something on the other end will be affected. This is the law of cause and effect. This is why we must be positive with our intentions, because what we affect will be affected whether we like it or not. And then there is the law of compensation. Okay, so basically, you can't help but affect the universe, and sometimes, good or bad, you can't always control. You cannot lead a perfect life and never break a blade of grass in a certain sense. So the idea is compensation. If you understand how the universe works and that you will at times be imperfect, it is important to go a little bit further and give back what you've accidentally taken for learning. And when it comes to learning, there's the last, they group kind of together. There's the last four things, right? So there's the law of relativity, polarity, rhythm, and cooperation. Okay, so basically, for the whole action of compensation, in other words, giving back to the universe what you take, remember there is a relativity. What you see is not the same as what another person sees from their perspective. So we must know that not everyone sees the things the same way. And for every action, for everything, there is a dualism. It's kind of, as we said, like technology. You can use it for good or you can use it for bad. So when you're compensating, you must understand that there is, when they had this massive concert, I believe it was U2 had this massive concert to try and help people affected in Ethiopia by a great flood, and there was famine. And when they dumped all this free food in the south, it made the north implode because they weren't aware of this concept of polarity. If you're going to do something, there is going to be an opposite to it, and you have to keep that in mind. A good action does have a negative aspect to it if you're not careful. And so, like U2 or Bob Geldof, when they try and give people free food, sometimes it can create other bigger problems if you're not keeping in mind these laws, universally speaking. And then, as I mentioned, the last two were rhythm and collaboration. So it's sometimes referred to as co-manifestation, and sometimes people think of that as sort of gender energies, the male-female energies kind of uniting, but I like to think of it more as so firstly, rhythms is exactly as it suggests. Everything is a cycle. Everything has, because it's vibration. Remember, if you go back to literally law number 2, everything is vibration. Everything has a frequency, and so because everything has a frequency, there is also rhythm to it. And rhythm basically just means cycles. And then that last one of collaboration, you can think of this as male and female, not literal, not in terms of their literal sexes, but in terms of their spiritual essences and how they fit together very nicely to form a very powerful unison of sorts. Now, some, as I say, take it as male and female, but I also see it as a law of collaboration. In other words, if you are trying to affect the universe and you understand rhythms and polarity and all these other things, you do better not just working by yourself, but by collaborating with people around you. And that collaboration means that if I'm a strong leader and you're a strong leader, that isn't, maybe we're trying to work to the same goal, but sometimes it doesn't make that perfect collaboration. Sometimes being a good leader means you need to know when you need to follow, and then you have the click. And so these are the 12 principles that essentially are like for those that follow let's call them the right-hand mystery schools, the positive mystery schools, the white hat, benevolent group. These are the things that they try and follow. And you can see these principles in nearly like every religion. And keep this in mind, because now as we go through some of the mystery schools, you'll see that in essence, these principles are really what drive the whole thing. And they are the stories that have been given to us through the ages by these different root races, if you would if you would take the example of Helena Blavatsky. And we'll look at her very shortly, but she says that there are periods of history that we have come from. There are she calls them root races. In other words, these are central origin points of human evolution in a certain sense. We apparently are the fifth root race at the moment, according to Blavatsky. And we'll maybe touch on this a little bit later, but I talk about the root race as our current moment in history, because each root race had attained a certain level of understanding, knowledge, and wisdom, but wasn't able to propagate forward in time. And so they gave the knowledge as a baton off to the next group. And so the epochs go forward, but the information is preserved. And this is where you start to get these mystery schools from. So maybe this is starting to make the picture a little bit clearer regarding the mystery schools. Now, I'd like to bring up this this book here because it has quite a few really good points, and it's not very long. I do recommend having a good read. There's a couple of places you can get it online for free. It's by Grace F. Kinoki, and it's basically an introduction to the mystery schools. And as I said, here you see Demeter. This is a relief of Demeter, Triptolemos, and Persephone, which are some of the Greek Olympian gods. And again, in the stories of the gods, you again get all these mystery school deep knowledges about the nature of the universe and how to navigate it for deep wisdom. But again, it can go further back. Now, I just want to pull up one of these quotes here. Okay, let's bring this up. So, she says here that, so here she's referencing how in millions of years ago, mankind was basically in great darkness in terms of our understanding. And as we slowly grew from this darkness in terms of our mental abilities, she says, as mind developed keener potentialities and the struggle for mental supremacy overcame the spiritual, the gift of intellect became a double-edged weapon. On the one hand, a bringer of spiritual awareness and undreamed of intellectual ecstasy, but also on the other hand, a wielder or a weapon of destruction, of horror, and of the worst cases, deliberate spiritual wickedness, diabolism. And so, as I was saying, there are two sides to the mystical schools, and that's why you have to have a good kind of discipline. In general terms, there's three ways that you avoid the negative aspects of the deep mystery schools. And again, many say that the mystery schools are very powerful technologies, and that's why you need a teacher. You can't just throw this information to the general public, or otherwise, they'll bastardize it. And they use the examples of how the ancient yoga that is taught in Hinduism and the Vedas and the ancient Indic traditions is nothing like you see in a New York studio with people in tights and yoga mats. Although they're doing the correct postures in a certain sense, they've completely lost all the spiritual wisdom that went along with it. And this dilution can lead to, again, people filling that deep want for a human that a human has to want to excel and discover. It can be hijacked by people that are not aware of where their sources are coming from. And this is why I say the journey is personal and spiritual. And when it's abused, it can lead to diabolism, diabolism, where we get the word diabolical from. It's people that use the wisdom of spirituality to lead people astray and away from their ultimate path and goal. Now, I wanted to also mention that, in terms of the great religions, there's different ways that people try to obtain deep enlightenment. So one of the ways was through trying to control your mind. Other traditions try to control the body. So you get these, Sufi type people that lay on nails and all kinds of weird things. They try to find that breakthrough connection to that next level through a physical realm. And then, of course, there is the there's the psychic, the physical, and then the spiritual realm, which is the monastic realm, which is, praying and meditating and having that kind of like belief to be given enlightenment. You get others that claim a fourth way, like Gurdjieff and Ouspensky, and others. And this is really where I want to start to tie up this episode of StoryTime 25. So we're kind of at the halfway mark here. And when I start to touch on the more common mystery schools, we will see there that before, the traditions were, if you don't do exactly this, you'll end up with negative effects. And some people know about these negative effects and are evil and will, use them to dominate. But in essence, you have to look at the combinations of the mystery schools up until today, giving us the best kind of tools possible to try and break from the samsara cycle that we have today. So in other words, what that basically means is with great knowledge, we can start to, even in a practical sense, discern a bit better between what a government is telling you is the truth versus what you know from your own experience and study is the truth. And that gives you a much better compass. That is not what governments want from you. Quite the opposite. And as I say, there are then agents that will understand these levers that can be pushed and pulled, psycho-spiritually speaking, and lead you astray. And the government is, unfortunately, one of the evildoers in a long-standing tradition, spiritually speaking. So, the mystery schools are really trying to break us away from this ego-based control of knowledge. And here also is another great quote. So, once upon a time, truth had seemed to be the common property of mankind, but because of increasing egoity, selfishness was born out of a desire and passion hitherto unknown, and but too often knowledge and power were abused until finally it became necessary to limit those who knew. Thus came initiation. So this is from where some of the origins of the mystery schools come from. Now, I don't want you to mistake this with secret societies. Okay. Now, when I talk about secret societies, like when we talk about, for example, Skull and Bones, this is a real society based in Yale, and there's movies been made about it. So there's although it's sort of conspiracy theory, it's absolutely founded in reality. And George Bush and many other massively influential leaders have been parts of these secret societies. Now, the relationship between mystery schools and secret societies are completely different. Although they're related, although the secret societies will claim to be the top of the ladder and they know the truth and their origins stretch further back and they have the power currently and all these things, whether you're looking at the Masons or I mean, just whatever. There are tons of secret societies, lots of them. All right, and although a lot of these people have links to these societies, I don't want you to mistake this with the mystery schools. They some interchange them, when in actual fact, the mystery schools are a group of people that usually, throughout the ages, have tried to bring good knowledge and wisdom, whereas secret societies like the Skull and Bones and good old George W., they're not trying to bring enlightenment. They're trying to keep information to themselves and ingratiate their group as a dominant predator class. And for example, one of the skulls that they have in their possession is the skull of Geronimo, and the family have been trying to get that skull back, and they don't want to. They don't want to give it back. So the skull of Geronimo. I think we'll probably find it here. Skull and Bones has a reputation for stealing keepsakes from other Yale societies. The practice is called crooking, and they strive to outdo each other. The society has been accused of possessing the stolen skull of Martin van Buren, Geronimo, and Pancho Villa. And anyways, so you can see here there's also a little section on conspiracy theories. But again, that's why the secret societies are completely enveloped in that like conspiracy theory, evil, Illuminati type stuff. But the mystery schools are not that. The mystery schools are not some high and mighty people in ivory towers trying to command the world. These are just average folk trying to bring high knowledge to us from the ancient world. And that's why they're not afraid to go further back than modern history and say, well, this knowledge comes to us from the Atlantean times, from pre-Gilgamesh, from the Anunnaki, from the Sumerians, from the antediluvians. They're not afraid to take the real knowledge and bring it forward to us in the present time. So the mystery schools are basically these like three general characterizations, right? So this is again from the mystery schools book. It's actually, let me bring it up on screen here for you. Here we go. All right. So they've remained threefold in character. Number one, the persistent spiritualization of the thought life of humanity, so that knowledge of things spiritual may penetrate into the heart and life in time may become a benediction of peace instead of tragedy or conflict. So again, a very positive core is present in the mystery schools that you don't find in a lot of these evil secret societies. And not all of them are evil, but they have, if they stray away from those core principles, the technology of spirituality can be used and bastardized as an evil diabolism. So number two, seeding grounds of adepts, nurseries for future recruits, who through trial initiation may become fit to receive supreme dignity of membership in their great brotherhood. And three, the preservation of truth for future races unsullied by human hand, and the polishing of the knowledge of truth through investigation by trained seers of the secrets of nature in the worlds invisible and visible. So that's the kind of like difference between a mystery school and those like secret societies like Skull and Bones and whatever. There's a great attempt by these individuals to try and keep us on the straight and narrow and help humanity go forward. Now, for example, Blavatsky spoke about the fifth root race, the Aryan race. This is a race that finds its origins in the Indus Valley. And we can see this um, quite a lot um, through the language or the sharing of culture and things like that. We can see there was a great civilization sort of source in the Indus at that time. And, the teachings of Buddha, for example, keep these traditions alive in this part of the world at this moment in time. And, for Blavatsky to delve into that, being a person from Russia, essentially, training in America, but bringing this Eastern knowledge forward was extremely difficult. We must remember that there were times in the past where people that claimed to have knowledge outside of the established order were highly persecuted. So, for example, here we have the medieval Inquisition. Let me bring that up on screen for you guys. Great. So, this was a terrible time when the church, through the Pope, basically gave a divine order to different groups, like, for example, the Knights Templar, to go and wage crusades. And through the divine right that they claim they had, to go and wage war and do very terrible things. Now, obviously, it worked both ways. All major religious institutions in the past have had some, well, not all, but most have had great conflict and strife. So, the Crusades are just one example of how, if you take the concepts of religion being the highest truth, and then you bastardize it with human waywardness, spiritually speaking, what you end up with are great deaths and destructions, unnecessary torture, and really just vicious torture, not just hanging a person, but really doing terrible things to them because you see them as evil and their belief systems are outside of your own. And we saw a similar thing, for example, also with the like the Salem witch trials, right? And again, this is also because of superstition and all kinds of things, people not understanding a reality beyond what the church was telling them at the time. Anyone who had a lucky charm or thought that there was a different way of looking at the seasons or nature or their connection to the universe was sometimes seen as a witch, and they were literally burnt alive. And so this is, again, why oftentimes the mystery schools hid their information, whether it was the Christians during the Romans or, even a lot of the Buddhists, for example, now in Tibet have had to flee because of the imposition of China's policies in that region. So the whole thing of this is that the mystery schools, some have really tried to bring forward humanity and help us. We said that we were going to touch on some of the more recent mystery schools. As I said, there's many of them, and there's really big names that we can bring forward. But each one would need its own, each person and each theme, in a sense, almost would need its own story time. So I want to pick a group that I find give us a good sense of these mystery schools and how they've tried to bring forward humanity and evolve us, psycho-spiritually speaking. And as I mentioned, a lot of this information has been really prosecuted over the years. If you were talking about heliocentrism during a certain time, that is that the Earth is not the center of the universe, but the sun is. Well, not the universe, but of the solar system. I mean, again, you would end up like Galileo did, and the point of that is simply that knowledge being so powerful is sometimes a threat. That's why we sometimes say speaking truth to power is a very powerful act, because sometimes the power tries to mask itself as truth, but really you cannot change the nature of the universe. And so truth remains supreme, even if people are burnt at the stake for claiming what their experiences are and what they think the nature of the world to be. Sometimes those ideas can be such a threat, right? And so one theme that I just want to bring up here is steganography before we dive into the mystery schools, because in trying to keep some of this information secret, sometimes these mystery schools, as I said, were quiet groups of people that moved across the world and met and wrote and started groups and really tried to dive into the experiences. But another way that they, throughout the ages, have tried to keep the ancient knowledge about us is through steganography. Now, steganography is a way of hiding information in plain sight. So you can see in this Wikipedia example, which isn't always the greatest, but here you can see in the first image everything's all garbled, but as you put a filter of different colors, you can see different letters. So if you have the right key, you understand certain things. Now, the mystery schools are supreme at this. And we're going to close up with Jordan Maxwell, because he really does a great job of showing us how symbolism is a language that the occult uses. And symbolism is just another way of information. But again, when you start to understand the mystic and the occult and the ancient, the modern symbols begin to make a lot more sense. For example, on the staff of the Pope, he's got a pine cone. And what's really interesting about that is, again, you've got symbolism, right? That goes, let me pull this up on screen here for you. Now, you can see through some religious ceremonies that the Pope has a pine cone on his staff. Now, that staff, as some would say, is a wand, basically. It is imbued with some kind of sacraments. It's made sacred in some way, and it therefore represents a certain kind of power. Now, that pine cone comes from ancient Egypt, and its symbolism is not only the pineal gland, but all kinds of geometric orders of nature. And what's interesting is they actually do have a giant pine cone at the Vatican in the garden there. Let's see, this is called the Pina. Here we go. Fontana di Pina. Scusa. Fontana della Pina. The Fountain of the Pine. Now, the Vatican actually stole this from Egypt. They don't want you to know that, but it left Egypt and it never came back. The pine cone in this case here is surrounded by the two peacocks on either side. So peacocks, again, symbolize a kind of divine eternity or cycle. In other words, that the creator is divine and always. Creation is eternal. And then in the middle there is the pine cone. And if you think of the pine cone as the seat of the soul, as many people have described it, it was seen that way and worshipped as a very powerful, not only referring to the pineal gland, but the way a pine cone opens and has this sacred geometry to it. It has phi and the golden ratio all over it. it's seen as a representation of that divine order of God itself, of the Creator itself. So it's very interesting that the Vatican would take that. And again, we're talking about the Vatican because the church, that is, often prosecuted people that didn't believe in their strict teachings, even though they themselves have a very deep mystical knowledge embedded in their very core. But at a time, it was taboo, and that's why a lot of these mystery schools and the symbolism goes underground. And almost everything around us has some kind of occult callback. It's actually amazing. So again, whether you're talking about Rosicrucians, the Golden Dawn, Theosophy, Anthroposophy, the Thelemetic Order, the Thule Society, all of these groups used symbology that was ancient, and they used it openly in public, but many people didn't understand what the swastika meant, or what the fasci meant, or where the term like Hollywood comes from. Hollywood, wands in the old days were made out of holly, branches of holly. And so Hollywood is where you create magic. You make up whatever you want and put it on a screen. It's they see themselves as magicians. It's not an accident. So let's have a look at some of these people here and finish up with some Jordan Maxwell to really hit this home and open up the door to our introduction to the occult and the mystery schools. Now, again, in no particular order, there have been lots of mystery schools. The Freemasons and the Rosicrucians are massive, and the Golden Dawn is also extremely famous because it's got Aleister Crowley in it, and he's infamous in some cases. If you read about him, he's sometimes seen as, the son of Satan, and in other cases, he's seen as a benevolent interpreter of spiritual connection. He was a conduit between ancient priests and other entities and all kinds of stuff. There's some that say, for those who thought he was Fowley, he was Crowley, and for those who thought of him holy, he was Crowley. I don't know where that comes from, but as I said, he's quite a controversial figure, let's just say. But for me, the two mystery schools that really underpin a lot of this positive side, what really is still useful and really necessary for us today in 2023, are again the mystery schools from people like Blavatsky, Ouspensky, Gurdjieff, and the like. And the reason I'm mentioning them is because this mystery school, although they kept much to themselves in the later 1800s. We've also spoken about how the late 1800s was a different shift in human consciousness as industry and technology really began to root humanity in the modern world we see today. There was a time prior to this where we were much more comfortable with religion and superstition, and we were much more independent people. Still much more connected to the ancient world. The late 1800s, just before World War I, saw the world begin to accelerate at a pace that had never been seen before. And as World War I broke out and there was great human loss and destruction and just terrible evil across the globe, many mystery schools came to the conclusion that they had failed. They had failed humanity in harboring the right tools and the right people to guide the civilization. They basically say you can't teach everyone, so you need to just teach the right people, the right information, and it's a difficult chore trying to preserve it when it's oppressed through all these thousands of years, and also information is lost along the way and changed. So at the end of World War I, we start to see two big mystery schools come forward. And one of them is through Helena Blavatsky, and she gives to us, let me bring up a picture of her here. So this is Helena Blavatsky, Helena Petrovna Blavatsky. And she was a Russian mystic, basically, and she started the Theosophical Society in 1875. Okay, so this is the Theosophical Society, and now this Theosophical Society and movement starts in New York, which is very interesting. As I said, at this time, women don't have many rights and are not seen as men's equal, but here comes Helena Blavatsky, and I mean, you can see that striking face she has with her. She was a very, some call her typically Russian, in other words, very like headstrong and boisterous and not easily swayed. And here she was in a man's world in New York in 1985. Sorry, in 1875, basically creating this Theosophical Society. And as Helena Blavatsky brings these new channelings with concepts like, for example, reincarnation, the West had never really, very few religions or mystical schools from the West really tie reincarnation into the grand mechanism of the universe in a way that makes sense, at least even to me. I'm not one who really follows reincarnation, but the way Blavatsky puts it, I can sort of understand it much more deeply than in other ways it's been put to me. And so she brings Hermeticism and ancient mystical traditions and all these mystical schools from Russia and creates the Theosophical Society with a couple of other people. Now, again, she has got an incredibly difficult life. It's never a straight road with Helena Blavatsky, but she has an incredible ability to bring and channel the Eastern traditions into the Western wording. And so it's through her that we get a lot of the deep awareness that the Buddhists, for example, understood in a way that isn't as diluted. She would channel them in ways, because now, as I said, they're busy gearing up to try and rid humanity of war and wickedness and away from that dark path. And so Blavatsky and the Theosophical Society try and bring this brotherhood together, and they again bringing stuff from ancient Egypt and India, and trying to congeal all of this together. And with the Theosophical Society, they give us many tools to not only understand where we are in our spiritual evolution as a society, but also more precise ways of following the ancient traditions. As I said, often these ancient traditions would use steganography or some other way to hide a message. So often, they would say, we will teach everyone, but we reserve the final mysteries for only those that are initiated or chosen to be initiated. There was always a key short, basically, with a lot of these mystery schools prior. You only got to know the real truths if you stuck with it. And this is where Blavatsky and Theosophy begin to differ. They're like, no, we need to bring this information in a way that we can teach the world, not just as we were before, keeping this information to ourselves. And of course, this causes great schisms in the Theosophical Society. Bits and pieces split off here and there, and really, it created a necessary ripple in a certain sense. Before things like Kabbalah and other occultism stuff was all, the Masonic rites and things like this, they were all kept very tightly close to the chest of these ceremonial leaders. And Blavatsky was just like, no, we must tell them what this means and why we're doing this, and really sort of laying the cards on the table. It's kind of like when a magician gives away its tricks. The rest of the magicians kind of look down on them. So the same sort of thing was happening through Theosophy and Helena Blavatsky, but she gave us fantastic tools to go forward. Now, another person that also came forward during this time is good old Gurdjieff, George Gurdjieff. Let's bring him up on screen. Okay, so now Gurdjieff was a philosopher, basically, and also a mystic. He also had very incredible powers in a certain sense. He was able to really project his mind and download information and take the ancient mystery traditions and exercises and bring them to the public. So Gurdjieff and another gentleman called Peter Ospensky, they end up with a very interesting relationship. And in a weird kind of roundabout way, they eventually find each other again, and from them comes the they then creates not the Theosophy but the Anthroposophy Society. And from this also they bring a lot of what was hidden in the then Austro-Hungarian area and India and Tibet, and like Helena Blavatsky, they give us a very rich source of information about the inner workings of not only the ideas in the mystery schools, but of how a mystery school itself works. They were there's quite a lot of story about how they sort of come to each other, and you can see the shift in the mystery schools now trying to become more open as the world has gone through this great tragedy of World War I, or is, in this case, in certain senses, approaching it. So the mystery schools since then have really tried to bring us beyond this backward direction where we're devolving. And, some will say that this de-evolution is actually on purpose, and this is why we need the mystery schools more than ever. And we'll look at these mystery schools with great precision and a lot more depth in future episodes. But what I want to just end off with is a little bit of Jordan Maxwell. So Jordan Maxwell, as I said, is a modern contemporary author, speaker, and he's a very deep academic studier of the occult and mysticism, religion, ancient history, and such. And I wanted us to just listen to Jordan Maxwell. He unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago, so we did enjoy him for quite a long time, but unfortunately he's no longer with us. So I thought it would be really great to end off this episode with some of what he kind of says and represents. One of the speeches that we're going to just start with is his definition to us that we are basically a race of humans that is detached from our history. And being detached from our history, we have everything we know is actually like we need like a new education, basically. And we have to, everything we know is a lie and not correct and not configured in the correct way. And so the information is actually damaging. And he says this is on purpose. The indoctrination dumbs us down and so allows us to be controlled. And so he gives us that bridge between the symbology of the occult and the secret societies that try and control us. We can see here that whilst Blavatsky and them represent the positive aspect of humankind trying to move forward, Maxwell warns us they are the left-handed schools, the sinister, the sinister ones who will use that same information to control humanity. And everywhere around us we see that those are the groups that are actually using this information in plain sight to remind us that we're under their control and that the mystery schools of Blavatsky and them are still struggling to emancipate humanity. So let's listen to good old Jordan Maxwell and then we'll call it a night there, shall we? Let's make sure we got some... Okay.
Some of the entrances are, I'm not going to go to them. There's no education.
Lack of education.
The lack of education. That's the biggest problem in education. There is none. Period. There ain't none. Like George Carlin says, be happy with what you got. It's not going to get any better. Remember? Did you ever hear him?
Oh, yeah. He's one of my heroes.
Sensational. Yeah, just be happy with what you got. And they just keep dropping down the scores so that you can get out of school, keep dropping it down the scores so that one day, like you said, one day you can get into MIT. You got a pencil? Yeah, come on in. You don't have to have a brain. The lack of education, that's what, just absolutely amazing. They keep talking about we need $50 billion for the school system and we need hundreds of millions for the school. Look what the schools are turning out. By their fruits you shall know them. Look at the fruit that's coming out of the Los Angeles school system. Look at the kids. Talk to them. Talk to the kids that go to Los Angeles Unified School District. Talk to them. They're alive. All they know is Big Top Pee Wee, a Hulkamania, and drugs and partying and drive-by shootings at night, and it's incredible. That is the output of the Los Angeles school system purposely. Understand this. When the government of the United States or the government of California state government or any governmental facility, the city of Los Angeles, when government pays a contractor to do something, you have to do exactly what you contracted to do. And you turn out the product exactly what they told you to do because you got a contract with government and you don't mess with that, okay?
So what he's saying there is basically that if government gives you a job to do and you do your job, the product is on purpose. If you're getting kids that are getting, like they say, this generation might be one of the first generations to have a lower IQ than the generation before it. That is a product of a contract being followed to the T.
Okay? So if the contract that the state of California has with the educational system in Los Angeles is turning out kids that can't even read. They don't even know how to find their way out of a paper bag. That's because they're supposed to be turned out like that.
The government, that's what the government
wants you to be stupid.
Yes.
That's why they will give you plenty of sex and drugs, alcohol, entertainment, blow up cars, do all kinds of crazy stuff, drive-by shootings. Just go out and have a ball. Don't let me catch you thinking too much. Don't let me catch you thinking too much and asking questions.
Don't watch Jordan Maxwell on your Saturday night.
That's right.
It's a bad way to worship Saturn.
Yeah.
So, you know, he makes such a good point, like, don't let me catch you thinking. Because that's the whole point of these mystery schools, is that they teach us how to not only think, but how to think well. And not just have intelligence, but to have wisdom. Not just facts, but truth. That is his whole point. And I wholeheartedly agree with him. And you know, he made an appearance on Gaia TV. So I'd like to play you just a little section because that's where he sort of links a bit more his beliefs about the mystery schools and ancient mysteries, also relating, for example, to megaliths and antediluvian structures and things like that. So let me pull that up for you. Just a sec.
And I am of the opinion that our history has been vastly changed, and so that we don't really know the history of mankind on this earth. We are finding that there are temples on the ocean floor, pyramids, Machu Picchu, Chichen Itza, incredible structures of temples and knowledge which is displayed about the universe, about astrology, and the astronomical truths about the universe. The ancient, truly prehistoric and ancient people, they knew all about it. We're trying to catch up today to what they knew tens of thousands of years ago. We are finding everything that we think we know. It's already been here tens of thousands of years ago. There was a higher life forms on this earth than we are.
So what he's often been communicating to us is that we've been devolving. If you see, like, for example, the pyramids, they just get worse as you get closer to modern times. It seems like the ancients had a much more superior understanding of just everything in general.
I have a vision of, from the ancient world, were not what we would refer to as humans. They looked like us, maybe, or in some ways like us. They were far superior. The people, whoever they were, that built the Great Pyramid of Egypt, had an extraordinarily brilliant understanding of the Earth, of our solar system, of the galaxy we are in, and all of the esoteric and profoundly important knowledge about life and the spirit of man and where we've come from and where we're going. And so it all implies that there was a far higher civilization all around the world. And the best science we have today are admitting that we're just trying to catch up with what the ancient peoples already knew. These ancient, brilliant builders and teachers, they didn't grow into that. They came in fully developed. When you look at Egypt as a classic example, if you go to the very beginnings of Egypt, it came in as an extraordinarily brilliant society of builders and knowledge, and then eventually devolved into what Egypt is today. But there was a time when Egypt was in its prime when it was founded. So it didn't kind of work up to, as we say, we're working up to some kind of a wonderful future. But Egypt didn't do that. It came in at its pinnacle.
And so I think that's a really great way to wrap up this whole story. Because again, Jordan Maxwell goes to great lengths, and I highly encourage you guys to just check out all of his work. And if you want to find out more about steganography, do check out Daniel List's over at The Dark Journalist. He's got fantastic, very precise deep dive about the steganography of the UFO file. But again, just going back to Jordan Maxwell, this is a supremely knowledgeable person on the occult symbology that we see around us. And he says to us that the ancients tried to preserve information for us, and they came fully formed. We might say that we were seeded by them. And their teachings are really the foundation of human existence. And while some of those people will try and keep that information from us, others are trying to bring us to that understanding, because we see that the ancients are trying to find their place in the cosmos. They're trying to understand the nature of the whole universe. And therein, I think, lies the journey for humanity. The very important point is that there are mystery schools that are trying to emancipate our spirits and try and grow humanity forward. And then at the same time, there are those that seek to use that same knowledge to control us. So Jordan Maxwell gives us that great bridge in between and shows us all around us how there are symbols right in our faces all the time, every day, that tell us that the real order that is controlling things today is still the same one that has followed us for all these years. And when we know that, then we can start to think a bit more clearly about the direction we want to take and the kind of authority that we're willing to accept. When we start to decode the symbols around us and see who really controls us, who our benefactors are, and who indeed tells us what we should know and do, we begin to stray away from that spiritual path that we are endowed with by our Creator to self-discover and self-actuate our own destiny. When you use the right spiritual tools, you can make the distinction between those that try and misguide you away from your journey and your path and claim that they are an authority on your knowledge versus the true path that you follow and you know more than anything because you've experienced it. So that is the breakdown of the mystery schools, kind of. As I said, this is an introductory episode where we're going to, in future, go much, much deeper into each person, every mystery school. This will not come up just once or twice, but many, many times in future story times. So I hope you enjoyed this more overall kind of view of why they are mystery schools to begin with. What are they sort of speaking about? What are they hiding? Why are some of them misconstrued as secret societies that are evil and trying to take over the world? And what can we learn from all of this without getting too stuck in the rabbit hole of, the Emerald Tablets of Thoth or some other great scriptures, the Bhagavad Gita, or each of these scriptures have great spiritual depth to them. But sometimes we don't have our entire lives to study them. So we have to take this information going forward as we embark on our journey and be very good stewards of this information, both for ourselves and for the world around us. Everything must make a beautiful geometry, because when you work with the universe, it creates the things you want without that negative pull on the other end. You are aware and work with nature. You are aware of how the effects function. If you're not, then you're just a bull in a china shop and you're just destroying everything and living a very hedonistic life of great pleasure and not a care in the world for anything around you. So that's what we're trying to keep away from. But it seems that the forces of today are continuously dumbing us down and devolving us. And so that's why I thought it's more important than ever to talk about the mystery schools in this story time and open our minds to the great universal truths that help us grow and move forward. So ladies and gents, with that, I'm going to close up. I love you all. Enjoy your week further. If you have any questions or comments, please drop them in the live chat or in the comments section. We'll put this up on YouTube at theprimematterpodcast.com. At the Prime Matter Podcast on YouTube, and you can reach us at theprimematterpodcast@gmail.com if you want to email us. Always interested in your thoughts, your opinions. As I said, I'm no expert and I'm still learning as you are. That's the joy of this dialectic. I look forward to next week. And so do enjoy your week. Blessings and much love. We'll catch you all at episode 26. Hope you enjoyed. Peace out.